Sunday school leader. Well, Ruth and I made it back safely from South Carolina on Tuesday, and I've been running ever since trying to get caught up for the week, and that's why this is a little bit later than normal getting out. Well, we had a great time with the family out there, but it's always good to be back home in your own bed, in your own shower pressure. I'm going to share a story that I told back in August of last year. We were studying Elijah, and in that fourth lesson, it was dealing with loyalty. And so I used this example. When I was 8 years old, I entered Cub Scouts, and I went through the ranks of wolf and bear, and this was before they had the rank of bobcat and tiger. At age 10, I became a Webelow, and I earned all 15 of the pins that go up on the ribbon on your shoulder. And at age 11, I entered the Boy Scouts. And right after I turned 13 years old, I achieved the rank of Eagle Scout. And one of the things recited at every Boy Scout meeting was the Scout Law. And almost 50 years later, I can still recall the 12 points of the Scout Law. Scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. Well, let's talk about the second point of the Scout Law, and that is being loyal. What does that mean? Well, loyalty means to be faithful to be true to. And as a Boy Scout in the early 1970s, we were taught to be loyal to friends, to our family, to our leaders, to teachers, to our country. And while these are, of course, important characteristics to have, what's more important is being loyal to God. Well, this week's lesson, we're continuing in the unit, Living Life Connected to Christ. This is the second lesson. It's called A Life of Loyalty out of John chapter 13, verses 21 through 27 and 31 through 35. And the point of the lesson is connection to Christ calls for consistent loyalty. Well, in today's lesson, we start off with the opposite of loyalty. We start off with betrayal. And this happens right after what we looked at last week, which was the washing of the disciples' feet. Well, in John 13, verses 21 through 27, that's our first part of the lesson text this week. And it starts off by saying, after he said this, well, after he said what? Well, it was after last week's lesson, after the washing of the feet, and he was talking about that, the lesson on humble service. And it said his spirit became troubled. And that's a good question to ask. Why would Jesus' spirit be troubled? Because he knew everything. He knew what was going to happen, right? So why would he be upset? Why would he be troubled if he knew everything in advance anyway? Well, it just shows the human side of him, just like when Lazarus passed away and Jesus wept. Jesus was, yes, God, but he was also human too. And so the human side, the human emotions come through as well. Well, these guys, these disciples, they've been with him for 3 years. They knew him, they've seen miracles, and now one is about to betray him, and not betray him just to be arrested, but Judas is going to betray him. Jesus is going to be tortured and executed. But you know what? Judas wasn't the only betrayer. If you think about it, think about those other disciples. Peter, he's getting ready to deny Jesus 3 times. All the other disciples, we can see in Matthew chapter 26, verse 56, when Jesus was arrested, all the other disciples fled, deserted him. So Jesus has some things to be upset about and troubled about in his spirit. And so Jesus says, one of you guys is going to betray me. And the disciples stared at each other. Well, who's it going to be? Is it going to be one of us? Who's it going to be? And probably looking at each other suspiciously. And I wonder about Judas. Was his heart just pounding really fast? I wonder if his tunic or whatever, if you could see it moving, his heart was beating so fast. I think of that 1983 movie, A Christmas Story. Most of you guys probably remember this. One of the main character's friends, his name is Flick. He stuck his tongue to the frozen flagpole. The bell rang in to bring everybody in from recess. Everybody ran in but Flick, right? He couldn't go because his tongue was stuck to the flagpole. And so the teacher says, well, where's Flick? And of course, scared that they were going to get in trouble, the boys just kind of looking around the room like, Flick, who's Flick? And I imagine that's kind of how Judas was when Jesus says, one of you is going to betray me. And Judas had already made arrangements with the chief priest. And he's probably looking around like, I wonder who that is. Acting like he didn't know who it was. And like I said, he'd already made this deal for 30 pieces of silver with the chief priest that he was going to turn Jesus over at an opportune time. Well, the Apostle Peter, as we can see in this text here, Peter is right beside John. And John is right beside Jesus. And John is the writer of this narrative. And in the Gospel of John, John refers to himself as the disciple whom Jesus loved. And so Peter says, John, ask him who it is. And John says, hey, Jesus, who is it? Jesus says, the one I'm going to give this bread to. Then what did Jesus do? He dipped the bread and he gave it to Judas. And as soon as Judas took the bread, what happened? Satan entered him. And Jesus told him, what you're about to do quickly. Well, there's only a few verses between the verses we just read here and the next few verses in this week's text. But I'd like to go ahead and just, in my class, I'm going to go ahead and read those. It just shows how much the disciples just didn't get it. Okay, in verse 28, no one at the meal understood why Jesus said this to Judas. But Jesus just said, the one I give the bread to, he's going to betray me, and he gave the bread to Judas. They didn't even grasp this clear statement. We'll get down to verses 31 through 33. And when Judas left, it seemed like the air was clear, so to speak, and Jesus could speak more directly to those 11 remaining disciples. The hour of Jesus' arrest is very close, and so he needs to speak these final words to prepare them for what lies ahead, not only for him, for Jesus, but for the disciples as well. Now notice the present tense that Jesus speaks in verse 31. The Son of Man is glorified. Not will be glorified, but is glorified. And then there's that convoluted statement, the Son of Man is glorified and God is glorified in him. And if God is glorified, God will glorify the Son in himself. And when he glorifies, and will glorify him at once. And it kind of makes your head spin, doesn't it? A lot of usage of the words glory and glorify here in that passage. What does that mean? Well, glory means, it's a condition of honor. And glorification means what? Giving glory, giving honor, right? So let's rephrase that just a little bit. It should make a little bit more sense, be a little bit more clear to us. The Son of Man is honored and God is honored in him. Since God is honored in him, God will honor the Son in himself and will honor him immediately or at once. So to me, that makes it a little bit more clear than the glory and glorification. So what's about to happen in human terms is the most vile, dishonorable thing that could happen to a human being. The humiliating mockery, horrendous torture, cruel execution. In human understanding, that brings only shame, not honor and glory. But that was God's plan all along, wasn't it? Through the execution, through the burial, through the resurrection of Jesus, God was going to show his love to want to redeem sinful mankind. And Jesus willingly, going through those events, would show his love as well. The Father's love showed in the Son. Well, Jesus shifts his talk here. It gets a little more emotional, more sentimental. I'm going to only be with you a little while longer. And I've got to go through this alone. You can't come with me. We're getting ready to part ways. And then we get down to verses 34 and 35, the last couple of verses in our lesson text this week. Jesus says, a new command I'm going to give you. As I have loved you, you are to love one another. And this is going to be one that when people see it in action, they're going to know that you're my disciples because of the love that you have for each other. So the question is, how did Jesus love his disciples? Well, he just demonstrated that, didn't he? By washing their feet, by being humble, and by serving. But I think specifically of two other examples. Let's think about Matthew. He was what? He was a tax collector before he came to be in Jesus' 12. He was hated by his fellow Jews. Can you think that Matthew might be thinking, the same grace that Jesus extended to me, the same love he extended to me, he didn't hate me, he included me. I'm to do that for other people. And then you got Nathanael. When Philip said, hey, come, we found the Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth, what did Nathanael say about Jesus' hometown? Can anything good come out of Nazareth? Well, apparently Nazareth wasn't the best place in the world to live at that time. Jesus didn't dismiss him, didn't ridicule him, didn't scold him for that. No, he didn't do that at all. He included him. And so as these specific instances come to mind about how Jesus loved and included these disciples, he's wanting them to go and do likewise to other people. Well, at the beginning of the lesson, we saw the opposite of loyalty, which was betrayal. And now we're looking really at love. So what does love have to do with loyalty? Well, we might think of a husband and wife love. There has to be loyalty for there to be love in that relationship. Well, while that's true, this word for love is agapao, a form of the verb agapao, the verb form of that noun agape. And what is that? We know what that is. It's that God-like love, the love that looks out for the best interest of other people. You can't be disloyal and agapao another person, right? Agapao and loyalty go hand in hand. So the question is, are you loyal to Jesus? Are you loyal to your fellow Christian? Do you love them as Christ does? And I know we all have room for improvement in all these areas. So you might ask your class in ways that you've seen Christians not act loving toward one another. Was that in a business meeting? Was that on social media? By just slamming somebody, maybe anonymously, but saying, just saying? Ask your class specific ways then we can show love for each other. One way to show love, of course, is to pray for and with your class this week. And I hope you do that. And I hope you tune back next week as we look at the next lesson in this series about being connected to Christ. Have a great rest of the week.